right, now we're going to start on section 5.1, but the second part of it. This is still angles and its measures, but now part 2, we're going to look at 2 different ways that we can measure angles. So 2 different ways that we can measure angles. The first way we can measure it is in degrees, which is what we're used to. So this is how big an angle opens up. So that's like from here to here. We're going to call this theta. We're going to see a lot of Greek alphabet in trig here. All right, so that's how big the angle opens up. Radians is the other way we can measure an angle, and this is how big the arc opens up. So this is this outside arc right here. So from here to here would be my radians. So degrees on the inside, radians would be here on my outside. So really for radians, you're almost thinking like circumference. So if you think about circumference of a circle, that's 2 pi r. So it's got that pi in it. Degrees right here would be the inside of that angle right here. All right, so 2 things we got to do. First thing we're going to do is we're going to convert to radians. So they're going to give me degrees. I'm going to convert to radians. Or they're going to give me radians, and I'm going to convert to degrees. And all we have to do is multiply by pi over 180 or 180 over pi, just depending on things that we can look at. Now, before we start, I'm going to kind of make a chart right here, just so you can see where this pi and 180 kind of comes from. All right, so first thing in this column, we'll put degrees. In this column, I'm going to put radians. And we're going to look at some degrees and radians that we're most comfortable with. All right, so the first thing we're comfortable with is 360 degrees. So 360 degrees is a whole circle. Remember we said circumference was 2 pi r. So if my radius is 1, that's 2 times pi times 1. So that's just 2 pi. So knowing this, we can get everything from it. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go down and I'm going to do 180 degrees. Well, how do you get from 360 to 180? You divide by 2. So if I take 2 pi and divide by 2, there's pi. This is where this pi over 180 comes from. Pi over 180, 180 over pi. All right, some other angles that are useful on my unit circle was that 90 that we saw before. All right, so to get 90, I could take 180 and divide by 2, or I could take 360 and divide by 4. So either one of those is fine. So if I take 180 and divide by 2, I'm just going to take pi and divide it by 2, and that's just pi over 2. So 90 degrees is the same thing as pi over 2 radians. All right, next angle, 60 degrees. So to get 60 degrees, I'm just going to take 180 and divide by 3. So if I take pi and divide by 3, that just becomes pi over 3. So these are just some angles that we should know. All right, 45 degrees. How can I get 45 out of something I already have? I can take 90 and divide it by 2. Now, if I take pi over 2 and divide by another 2, I have to multiply the reciprocal, which is pi over 2 times 1/2. So those 2 2's are going to get multiplied together and give me pi over 4. All right, the last one we're going to look at here before we start converting this is 30 degrees. To get 30, I got options. I can take 60 and divide by 2, or I can take 180 and divide by 6. That might be the best one. So if I take 180, which is pi, and divide this by 6, it means I got to divide pi by 6, and that's pi over 6. So that's me converting. So the easiest way to do is to look at this one, since this is almost like 1 unit. So if I'm converting to radians, I'm going to multiply by pi over 180 because I want my 180 to be in the bottom, because here I have 150 degrees in the top. So degrees in top, degrees in bottom needs to go away. So let's start these and let's look at number 7. So number 7 gives me 150 degrees, and I got to convert this to radians. So here we got to multiply by pi over 180. So I'm multiplying by pi over 180. So either you're going to do pi over 180 or 180 over pi, one of those 2 things. All right, now the reason here we do pi over 180 is because I have degrees in the top and here I have degrees in the bottom. So these 2 degrees are going to cross each other out. And then to multiply fractions, I just go straight across. So this is 150 pi over 180. And all I have to do is just simplify 150 divided by 180. So here we go, 150 divided by 180 gives me a decimal. So I'm going to change that back to a fraction, and that gives me 5 over 6. So my answer here, don't forget pi's got to stay in my answer, is 5 pi over 6. So 150 degrees is the same thing as 5 pi over 6 in terms of radians. All right, let's look at number 8. Number 8 is 145 degrees. So here I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to multiply by pi over 180. 180 got to be in the bottom because this degrees has to cross out with this right here. When I go straight across, I get 145 pi over 180, and I'm just simplifying 145 over 180 using my calculator. 145 divided by 180, and I change it to a fraction, and that gives me 29 over 36. So this right here reduces to 29 pi over 36. And that's how we convert from degrees to radians. All right, last one right here is 320 degrees. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to multiply by pi over 180. Remember, 180 is in the bottom because those degrees have to cross out. And I'm going to try to go straight to my answer right here because I know I have to basically just simplify this 320 divided by 180. So I've got 320 divided by 180. I'm going to change this to a fraction. It's kind of hard to see right here, but this gives me 16 over 9. So this right here reduces to 16 pi over 9. So whenever you're doing radians, it should always have a pi in the numerator. All right, so that's converting to radians. Now let's come down here and let's look at converting back to degrees. So to convert to degrees, now my pi is going to be on the bottom. Why is pi on the bottom here? Because pi is on the top in all of these problems right here. So now I'm going to multiply by 180 over pi. Now up here, the degrees crossed out. Right here, my pi's are going to cross out. So I'm basically taking 7 times 180 and dividing this by 6. So 7, let me write this out, 7 times 180 so you can see it. And all this is divided by 6. So 7 times 180 gives me out 1260. This right here gets divided by 6. So 1260 divided by 6 gives me out 210. Remember, we're solving for degrees. So this is 210 degrees. All right, next one, number 11. This is radians. How do I know? Because it has a pi in it. So I need to multiply by 180 over pi. Pi needs to be in the bottom, so these pi's will go away. So right here, I'm going to take this, I'm going to say 4 times 180, that's the numerator, just multiplying straight across, and all this gets divided by 3. So numerator, 4 times 180 gives me 720. Don't forget, 720 gets divided by 3. When I take 720 and divide by 3, that gives me out 240 degrees. All right, now, number 12, I'm going to try to go straight to my answer. This is still radians because it has pi. So I'm going to multiply once again by 180 over pi. Pi's go away. Now, in my calculator, I'm going to type 11 over 6 and just multiply that by 180. Now, since 11 over 6 is a fraction, I'm going to put that in parentheses. Parentheses, 11 divided by 6. Let me zoom in here so you can see what I'm doing. So 11 divided by 6, and then I'm just going to take that and multiply it by 180. Now, I don't really need this multiply sign right here since I have parentheses, but we'll go with it. And that gives me out 330 degrees. So this last problem right here, when I solved it, gave me out 330 degrees. So you show as much or as little work as you need to get you there. So this is two different ways that we can write angles. We can write them as degrees, or we can write them as radians. Degrees is going to have the little degree symbol here. Radians is always going to have a pi within your problem.